Justin, one of the things I want to ask you, because this obviously being based in Utah here at Sutherland Institute, it's very gratifying to see Utah ranked number one as the best state for upward mobility in the nation. And I sort of have used the language sometimes that Utah can be, should be, should protect this idea of we're the upward mobility capital of the nation. We're kind of where the American dream is the most alive and well. And, that can turn into sometimes, oh, like, look how great we are. We're doing so many things well. And we are. And so I want to ask you sort of two things. Number one, can you tell us in the metrics that you all used for this report, why is it that Utah does so well when it comes to upward mobility? And obviously, we need to be clear-eyed at where our strengths are. But then I also want to ask you about, are there any areas where we have risk of slipping as a state, or areas where we need to make some improvements to kind of keep our upward mobility strong?
Yeah, so I would say the main things that Utah has really high advantages of going for them with respect to social mobility is that they have across the four different pillars, they have they score either in the top 10 or the worst one is still in the top like 20 across all four of the pillars that we use to measure social mobility. Particularly, Utah scores very highly on having high business dynamism. This means a lot of new businesses, a lot of labor market work going on, a lot of worker churn, which is basically a measure of how easy people can move from one company to another. What are the share of workers that work at firms that are 5 years or younger, suggesting that there's a budding kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem. And Utah ranked number two in the country on that. I have a different index where we measure productive entrepreneurship, and Utah also ranks the MSAs within Utah also rank very highly on that. So they have high measures of venture capital, small business growth, combined with large businesses and innovative activity going on, while they have low levels of lobbying, which tend to, you can be new firms, but they're the type of firms that tend to allocate resources versus building wealth. Utah also has pretty high quality legal systems and are very low on measures of corruption, which also obviously improve. And then I think, of course, I believe we talked about this last time I was on, that social capital in Utah is very strong. It means that the community is very bonded, neighbors know each other really well, and they're more connected in that sense. And there's a lot of charity. There's low charity regulations, but also high levels of charitable activity going on in the state and volunteering. And I think that's incredibly important when we think about social mobility, and perhaps is something that, at least as myself as an economist, we often overlook, because one of the beautiful things I think about charity and being connected with your neighbors and having these community bonds is that those type of individual actions can be really good substitutes, or oftentimes complement what what kind of federal or state based regulations or welfare policies kind of how they typically stand, in terms of that they basically, usually a one size fits all type of model that doesn't really address oftentimes the kind of the core needs of individuals. But if you have strong community bonds, that kind of fills in the gaps where these type of overarching one size fits all policies tend to fail, or where they just can't succeed by by the nature of trying to have one policy that kind of fixes everything for everybody. That kind of community bond allows for a lot of interactions there. And then finally, family stability and parental engagement. One of the factors that I didn't really appreciate more until I started really digging into the research and the work on this is how important having stable families and parents who are involved in their kids' lives matter for mobility. And this is in part because education both happens at school, but also at the home. And especially at the home is where you learn a lot of those kind of soft skills, cognitive skills that make you a more well rounded individual. And, obviously, we know education is important for outcomes, but also being able, being a cognitively sound person and a holistic person makes you more attractive in the labor force, and makes you provide, more different skills in those areas as well. So I think that's where, Utah really stands out relative to many of the other states. And I think if you want to protect those strengths, you have to, keep making movements in education freedom and school choice, for example. think that's definitely a room for improvement, but we're seeing some momentum in that as well. And also, not necessarily resting on your laurels because we have this sort of federalist or federalism policies kind of throughout the state, without the states. Um, you want to make sure you kind of keep up as leaders, right? So it's, if states start realizing what Utah has going for them and they try to replicate those models in their states, right? It's obviously great for those states. And I'm not necessarily saying it's a race that, therefore, Utah needs to push other states down or anything. That's obviously not what I mean. I mean more, keeping up to date with like what are other states doing? Where are other models that are working? How can we, for example, in the one door policy, like Utah stands out in that. But if other states start implementing them as well and they get approval from the federal government to do so, kind of learning, okay, maybe there's other ways those systems are working that we can implement here as well. So I think, yeah, overall, that there's a lot of strengths in Utah is clear by the fact that they are number one, and trying to build on those strengths and protecting those strengths is important.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.